The rain fell in heavy sheets across Washington, D.C. on the evening of October 17, 1997. Street lamps cast hazy halos through the downpour, their light reflecting off the slick pavement of Massachusetts Avenue. 23-year-old Eliza Johnson pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders as she left her apartment building. The weather forecast had predicted only light showers, but the skies had opened up into a deluge that seemed determined to wash away the city itself. Eliza was the only daughter of Senator Marcus Johnson, one of only 2 black senators serving in Congress at the time. A recent graduate of Georgetown University with a degree in political science, she had been following in her father's footsteps, working as a legislative aide in the Capitol. Bright, ambitious, and well-liked, Eliza represented the promise of a new generation of leadership. That rainy Friday evening, security cameras captured her leaving her apartment at 7:42 p.m. She wore a navy blue raincoat, carried a small black leather purse, and appeared to be in no particular hurry. According to her roommate Vanessa Chen, Eliza had mentioned meeting someone but hadn't specified who or where. She just said she needed to take care of something and would be back in a couple of hours. Vanessa would later tell investigators. She seemed perfectly normal, maybe a little preoccupied, but not upset or anxious. By midnight, when Eliza hadn't returned or answered her pager, Vanessa began to worry. By morning, with still no word, she called Eliza's parents. By afternoon, Senator Johnson had mobilized a search effort that would grow to involve the highest levels of law enforcement in the district. The investigation began like most missing persons cases, checking hospitals, interviewing friends, and canvassing neighborhoods. But Eliza Johnson wasn't just anyone. As the daughter of a prominent senator, her disappearance immediately attracted media attention and political pressure. Within 48 hours, her face was on every news broadcast and newspaper front page in the country. 3 days after she vanished, the first significant clue emerged. A maintenance worker inspecting drainage systems found Eliza's purse in an abandoned subway tunnel near the Anacostia River, in a part of southeast D.C. that had been slated for redevelopment. The tunnel, part of an unfinished expansion of the metro system from the 1980s, had been sealed off for years, officially accessible only to city maintenance workers. Detective Raymond Mercer, a veteran of the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department's Major Case Unit, arrived at the scene as rain continued to drizzle over the city. The entrance to the tunnel was concealed behind overgrown vegetation and temporary construction barriers. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of damp concrete and stagnant water. The purse was just sitting there, like someone had carefully placed it on a concrete ledge, Mercer would later recall. Not thrown, not hidden, placed. That's what struck me as odd right from the start. The black leather handbag contained Eliza's wallet with her ID, credit cards, $43 in cash, her apartment keys, a tube of lipstick, and a small notebook. Nothing appeared to be missing. There were no signs of a struggle in the tunnel, no blood, no torn clothing, nothing to indicate what might have happened to the young woman who carried it. The only unusual element was a series of numbers written in Eliza's handwriting on the last page of her notebook, 1017-8329R. The discovery of the purse transformed the investigation. Why would Eliza Johnson, raised in the affluent neighborhoods of Upper Northwest, venture into an abandoned tunnel in one of the city's most neglected areas? How did she even know about its existence? And most disturbing of all, if someone had taken her, why leave behind her purse with all her identification and valuables intact? As investigators combed through the tunnel and surrounding area, they found themselves navigating not just a physical labyrinth, but a political one as well. Senator Johnson demanded answers, using his considerable influence to pressure the police department, the FBI, and even the office of the mayor. His wife, Catherine, a respected civil rights attorney, appeared on national television pleading for information about their daughter. "Eliza is our only child, our heart," she said, her voice steady despite her evident distress. "Someone knows what happened to her. We're asking, we're begging, for that person to come forward." The Johnson family offered a reward of $100,000 for information leading to Eliza's whereabouts. Tips flooded in, most leading nowhere, but several pointing to the same disturbing possibility, that Eliza's disappearance might be connected to her work at the Capitol. In the weeks before she vanished, Eliza had been assisting her father's office with research for upcoming hearings on federal housing policy. The legislation under consideration would have redirected billions in funding toward urban renewal projects, including in areas of D.C. that had long suffered from disinvestment. According to colleagues, Eliza had been particularly focused on allegations that certain development companies were acquiring properties in predominantly black neighborhoods at artificially low prices, with inside information about where federal dollars would eventually flow. She was asking questions that made some people uncomfortable, said Thomas Wells, Senator Johnson's chief of staff, not just about the companies involved, but about who in government might be feeding them information. The investigation took a new turn when detectives interviewed Lawrence Frazier, a former urban planning consultant who had been fired from the Department of Housing and Urban Development 6 months earlier. Frazier claimed to have met with Eliza twice in the weeks before her disappearance, providing her with documents showing suspicious patterns of property acquisitions in Southeast D.C., including areas near the tunnel where her purse was found. She was onto something big, Frazier insisted. She had connected some powerful developers to officials inside HUD and possibly even Congress. She told me she was gathering evidence for her father to use in the hearings. Frazier's credibility, however, was questionable. His termination from HUD had been contentious, with accusations of mental instability and fabricating evidence. When pressed for specifics about what exactly Eliza had uncovered, his answers became vague and inconsistent. After 3 separate interviews, detectives concluded he was likely injecting himself into a high-profile case for attention. Yet the possibility that Eliza's disappearance was connected to her work couldn't be dismissed entirely. Senator Johnson himself believed this was the most likely explanation, pointing to threats he had received over his housing legislation. "My daughter was helping me expose corruption," he told reporters, "and someone wanted to silence her." But as the investigation continued, a different picture of Eliza began to emerge, one that complicated the narrative her parents had constructed. Phone records showed multiple calls in the weeks before her disappearance to a prepaid mobile phone that investigators couldn't trace. Her bank statements revealed several cash withdrawals of exactly $500, money her parents couldn't account for, and her roommate eventually admitted that Eliza had seemed increasingly secretive in the months before she vanished, often taking calls in private and being vague about her whereabouts. "I thought maybe she was seeing someone she didn't want to talk about," Vanessa told detectives. She would get these calls and her whole demeanor would change. Not scared exactly, but intense, like whatever she was involved in consumed her. 6 weeks into the investigation, another witness came forward. Michael Torres, a graduate student at American University, contacted police claiming he had seen Eliza the night she disappeared. According to Torres, he had been leaving a bar in Adams Morgan around 9:30 p.m. when he spotted her getting into a dark sedan with government plates. He hadn't come forward earlier because he hadn't made the connection until seeing her picture on a news broadcast. "She didn't seem distressed," Torres said. "She looked like she was getting into the car voluntarily. I remember thinking it was strange because of the rain. She stood there for a moment before opening the door like she was making a decision." Torres's statement aligned with footage from a traffic camera that had captured a dark sedan matching his description heading southeast on Pennsylvania Avenue at 9:47 p.m. The image was too grainy to identify the license plate or see who was inside, but it represented the last potential sighting of Eliza Johnson. The discovery that Eliza might have been in a government vehicle opened troubling new avenues of investigation. Detective Mercer requested access to logs of all government vehicles checked out that evening, but immediately encountered bureaucratic resistance. Requests were delayed, records were declared incomplete, and in some cases, access was denied outright on grounds of administrative procedure. "We hit a wall," Mercer later admitted. "A wall made of paperwork and protocol, but a wall nonetheless." Senator Johnson used his position to pressure various agencies, but even his influence seemed to have limits. "Something isn't right," he told Mercer during a tense meeting at police headquarters. "I've spent 20 years navigating government bureaucracy and I've never seen records requests stonewalled like this." As weeks turned into months, the investigation began to stall. The tunnel where Eliza's purse was found yielded no additional evidence despite multiple searches. The mysterious numbers in her notebook, 10, 17, 83, 29R, led nowhere, despite being run through every database available to law enforcement. Interviews with Eliza's friends, colleagues, and acquaintances painted the picture of a young woman who was passionate about her work, but otherwise led a relatively ordinary life. Then, 4 months after Eliza's disappearance, the case took another unexpected turn. Katherine Johnson received an anonymous letter at her law office. Inside was a single photograph showing what appeared to be a concrete wall with the same numbers found in Eliza's notebook spray-painted in red, 10-17-83-29R. There was no note, no explanation, only a postmark from Richmond, Virginia. The photo launched a new wave of investigation. Forensic analysts determined it had been taken on film and developed at a commercial photo lab, likely within the previous month. The concrete wall had distinctive features that experts believed matched the architectural style of the DC metro system, specifically stations built in the early 1980s, but with dozens of such locations throughout the city and its suburbs, and limited visual information in the photograph, narrowing down the exact location proved challenging. The FBI, which had been assisting with the case since the beginning, assigned a team to investigate every metro station and maintenance tunnel in the system. For weeks, agents crawled through service corridors and examined walls, looking for the mysterious sequence of numbers. Their search expanded to include abandoned civic infrastructure throughout the district, old bomb shelters, decommissioned water treatment facilities, forgotten utility tunnels beneath government buildings. Meanwhile, Senator Johnson grew increasingly frustrated with what he perceived as a lack of progress. He began to publicly question whether certain elements within the government were deliberately impeding the investigation. During a Senate hearing ostensibly about transportation funding, he confronted the FBI director directly. "My daughter has been missing for 137 days, he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Every day, I wake up not knowing if she's alive or dead. And every day I become more convinced that people within our own government know more than they're saying." The accusation created a political firestorm. Some of Johnson's colleagues rallied to his support, while others distanced themselves, suggesting privately that grief had clouded his judgment. Media coverage split along partisan lines, with some outlets exploring his allegations seriously, and others portraying them as conspiracy theories from a desperate father. In this heated atmosphere, a Metropolitan Police Department internal affairs investigation revealed that someone had accessed the file on Eliza's disappearance without authorization multiple times. The digital footprint led to a terminal used by officers assigned to a joint task force with federal agencies. When questioned, no one admitted to viewing the file, and security camera footage from the relevant times had been routinely overwritten. "It might be nothing," Detective Mercer told the Johnsons. "Files on high-profile cases often attract more attention within the department, but we're looking into it." Katherine Johnson, who had maintained a quieter presence than her husband throughout the ordeal, now emerged as a formidable advocate. Drawing on her legal expertise, she filed Freedom of Information Act requests with multiple agencies and assembled a team of private investigators, many of them former federal agents who had become disillusioned with government service. Their parallel investigation focused on the numbers from Eliza's notebook. Katherine had become convinced they were the key to understanding what had happened to her daughter. Working on the theory that they might represent a date combined with some form of location code, her team discovered that October 17, 1983, potentially represented by the first three numbers, was the date when initial geological surveys had been conducted for the planned metro expansion that included the tunnel where Eliza's purse was found. The project had been abandoned in 1985 due to budget constraints, but not before significant preliminary work had been completed. The records from that period were sparse, but they indicated that the tunnel system was more extensive than what appeared on public maps. Several additional passages had been excavated but never completed, their entrances sealed and their existence largely forgotten, except in archived engineering documents. Armed with this information, Katherine's team gained access to the original survey maps through a former Metro engineer. The maps revealed that station number 29, designated with an R for reserved, had been planned for a location less than half a mile from where Eliza's purse was discovered. Though construction had never progressed beyond initial excavation, the site existed, a concrete shell buried beneath an empty lot that had once been planned as a community center. On a cold morning in March 1998, nearly 6 months after Eliza disappeared, Katherine Johnson stood with Detective Mercer and a team of police officers as construction equipment broke through the sealed entrance to Station 29R. The air that escaped from the opening carried the musty scent of decades of abandonment. Inside, their flashlights illuminated a vast, unfinished space, concrete pillars supporting a ceiling that had been designed to hold the weight of the city above, walls marked with faded construction notations, floors covered in a thin film of water from years of seepage. and on the far wall, clearly visible despite the darkness, were the numbers 10 to 1783 29R, painted in what had once been bright red but had faded to a rusty brown. The search of the abandoned station took hours. Every inch of the space was examined, photographed, and catalogued. Divers checked the deeper pools of water that had accumulated in what would have been elevator shafts. Ground-penetrating radar was used to identify any anomalies beneath the concrete floors. In a small maintenance room off the main chamber, they found a cot, the remains of food packaging, and other evidence suggesting someone had lived there, at least temporarily, within the past year. But the most significant discovery came from one of the divers, who recovered a waterproof case from the bottom of an elevator shaft. Inside was a collection of documents, photocopies of property records, maps marked with property acquisitions, and internal HUD memos discussing future development zones. Many of the documents were stamped confidential, or for internal use only. Forensic analysis later confirmed what the Johnsons had immediately suspected. Some of the handwritten notes on the documents matched Eliza's handwriting. She had been there, in that forgotten place beneath the city, presumably hiding evidence she had collected. The documents painted a disturbing picture of coordination between certain development companies and officials within multiple government agencies. Properties in predominantly black neighborhoods had been systematically devalued through denied infrastructure improvements, selective code enforcement, and even manipulated crime statistics. Once property values hit their lowest point, holding companies with obscure ownership structures purchased entire blocks. Companies that financial records revealed were connected to some of the largest real estate developers in the Mid-Atlantic. Most damning of all, these acquisitions frequently preceded announcements of major federal investments in the same areas by mere weeks, suggesting advanced knowledge of government decisions worth millions in property value increases. The discovery transformed the investigation. What had been treated primarily as a missing persons case now expanded to include public corruption, fraud, and potentially conspiracy. Federal prosecutors were brought in, and Senator Johnson's housing policy hearings took on new significance as evidence was presented, showing how systematic disinvestment in black communities had been used as a mechanism for profit. Yet despite these developments, the central question remained unanswered. What happened to Eliza Johnson? The evidence suggested she had been investigating corruption, had discovered the abandoned station through historical research, and had used it to hide documents she had collected. But who had she gotten into a car with that rainy night? How had her purse ended up in a different tunnel? And most importantly, where was she now? In the summer of 1998, 9 months after Eliza's disappearance, another potential breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A former security guard at a private data storage facility in Virginia contacted Katherine Johnson's investigative team with a strange story. He claimed that 2 men identifying themselves as federal agents had arrived at the facility in the early hours of October 18, 1997, the day after Eliza vanished, with a young woman who matched her description. According to the guard, the woman had appeared disoriented but not physically harmed. The men had explained they were conducting a classified operation and needed access to the facility's secure room, where clients could review sensitive materials without digital surveillance. They had presented credentials that the guard, a Vietnam veteran with decades of security experience, had believed were authentic. She didn't say anything, the guard recalled, but she looked at me in a way I've never forgotten. Not afraid, exactly. More like she was trying to tell me something without words. The guard had no record of who the men were or what agency they claimed to represent. The facility's visitor logs for that day had been corrupted according to management, and security camera footage was automatically deleted after 60 days. When asked why he hadn't come forward sooner, the guard admitted he had been warned to stay quiet and had only reconsidered after retiring and moving to Florida. His account, while compelling, was impossible to verify. The data storage facility had changed ownership twice since 1997, and most of the staff from that period had moved on. Without corroboration, the story remained just that, a story possibly from someone seeking attention or financial gain. Yet it aligned with other fragments of evidence: the government-plated sedan, the unauthorized access to police files, the systematic obstruction of record requests. To the Johnsons and their supporters, it suggested a disturbing possibility that Eliza had been taken into some form of extrajudicial custody because of what she had discovered. Senator Johnson became increasingly outspoken, using his position to demand answers from the highest levels of government. In a speech on the Senate floor that was carried live by major networks, he laid out what he called a pattern of deliberate obstruction in the search for his daughter. "We face a choice as a nation," he declared. "Either we believe that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law, or we accept that some among us can make American citizens disappear with impunity." The speech divided Washington. Some dismissed it as the desperate rhetoric of a grieving father. Others saw it as a courageous stand against corruption. What no one could deny was the ripple effect it created through multiple federal agencies, as internal investigations were launched to determine if anyone had exceeded their authority in relation to Eliza Johnson or the evidence she had collected. In the fall of 1998, these investigations began to yield results. A mid-level manager at HUD was found to have deleted emails and shredded documents related to the development projects Eliza had been researching. A deputy director at the Department of Transportation admitted to removing her name from visitor logs when she had come to interview staff about infrastructure planning. Most significantly, a senior FBI agent was discovered to have ordered surveillance on Eliza in the weeks before her disappearance without proper authorization, claiming later he had been acting on a confidential tip about potential espionage that never materialized. These revelations suggested a coordinated effort to monitor Eliza's activities and potentially impede her research, but they stopped short of explaining what had happened to her on that rainy October night. No one admitted to direct involvement in her disappearance, and physical evidence linking any specific individual to the abandoned station or the tunnel where her purse was found remained elusive. As the one-year anniversary of Eliza's disappearance approached, Washington, D.C. found itself at the center of a complex tangle of investigations. The corruption she had been researching was now the subject of multiple federal grand juries. Several prominent developers had been indicted, along with city officials and federal employees who had facilitated their schemes. Senator Johnson's housing legislation had passed with broad bipartisan support, including provisions specifically designed to prevent the type of systematic disinvestment Eliza had uncovered. Yet for Marcus and Katherine Johnson, these victories rang hollow. "Justice for communities is important," Katherine told reporters. "But we still don't have justice for our daughter." On October 17, 1998, exactly 1 year after Eliza walked out of her apartment and into the rain, the Johnsons held a vigil at the Lincoln Memorial. Thousands attended, standing silently with candles as the rain fell once again on the Capitol. The image of the grieving senator and his wife, illuminated by candlelight with the Washington Monument rising in the background, became an iconic symbol of their unresolved quest for truth. In the years that followed, the case of Eliza Johnson transformed from a criminal investigation into something more profound, a symbol of the ways in which power could be abused and accountability evaded in American society. Books were written, documentaries produced, congressional hearings held. The abandoned tunnels where her purse was found and the unfinished Station 29R became macabre tourist attractions, despite official efforts to seal them off from public access. Some witnesses came forward with new information, only to recant or disappear themselves. Conspiracy theories flourished, ranging from the plausible to the absurd. Self-proclaimed psychics offered their services to the family, claiming to have had visions of Eliza in locations ranging from Montana to Morocco. Through it all, Detective Raymond Mercer continued to work the case long after most of his colleagues had moved on to more recent investigations. Even after his retirement in 2004, he maintained a home office filled with files, photographs, and notes related to Eliza Johnson. He had promised the Johnsons he would never stop looking, a promise he kept until his death in 2017. Senator Johnson did not seek re-election in 2002, choosing instead to establish a foundation in his daughter's name, dedicated to government transparency and anti-corruption efforts. Katherine Johnson returned to her legal practice, specializing in cases involving abuse of power and civil rights violations. Together, they transformed their tragedy into a mission, their private grief into public purpose. In a rare interview on the 10th anniversary of Eliza's disappearance, Senator Johnson reflected on how the case had changed him and the country. "Before this happened, I believed in the system because I was part of it," he said. "Now I understand that systems are only as just as the people who operate them, and how easily they can be corrupted when no one is watching." Today, the tunnel where Eliza Johnson's purse was found stands as a somber reminder of a mystery that remains unsolved. Urban explorers occasionally venture inside despite official prohibitions, leaving flowers or candles on the concrete ledge where her belongings were discovered. The numbers 10, 17, 83, 29R have become a kind of code among activists fighting against gentrification and corruption, spray-painted on development sites throughout the district. For most Washingtonians, the story of Eliza Johnson has faded into the background, becoming part of the city's complex historical tapestry. But for those who remember, who were there during those rain-soaked days of 1997, the unanswered questions still haunt. What secrets lie buried beneath the Capitol's gleaming monuments? What truths remain hidden in sealed records and classified files? And most hauntingly of all, what really happened to the bright young woman who walked into the rain one October night and vanished without a trace? The answers, if they exist at all, remain locked away, like the abandoned station where Eliza hid her evidence, sealed off from public view but never truly forgotten, waiting for someone brave enough to break through the barriers and finally bring the truth to light.